Let's talk about a key word for this whole entire course. So our first video, we talked about anatomy and physiology, how the idea of structure relating to function is a lens at which we can look through the whole course through. The same is true with homeostasis. This is a key concept that you really need to understand almost anything related to A&P. So homeostasis is the body's ability to maintain a stable internal condition despite a changing external environment. And this is a dynamic process. So we're going to keep our inside the same despite all of the changing things around us. And this applies to a lot of properties like temperature and blood sugar and blood pressure. We don't want it to be too high or too low. And so to do this, we're going to use homeostatic controls, and it involves three key parts: a receptor that's going to monitor and sense changes in the environment, a control center that is going to receive that information and determine the set point and determine what to do, and then the effector, which will provide the output. And these are linked. So if we have some sort of stimulus, this is going to produce a change in a variable. That is going to be detected by our receptor, which is going to send that information along what we call the afferent or approaching pathway to our control center, which will decide, hey, we got to do something about this, and it will send that information along our efferent pathway, which is our output information, and it will reach an effector, which will have the response to bring it back to homeostasis. So if we use the example of temperature, North Carolina summer, things are getting hot. That's stimulus. It's detected. We have thermoreceptors that can detect temperature, and they're going to tell the brain, hey, it is way too hot. Our body temperature is starting to rise. The brain will then send information to different parts of the body to have key effects like sweating, for example. That's why when you go outside, 98 degrees, you're going to start perspiring. You're going to try and lower that body temperature. And that's what will work. That evaporation will be cooling, and it will return your body temperature to baseline. Now, what happens in most homeostatic controls is that when you bring that body temperature back to baseline here, it's going to turn off the system. So we call this negative feedback, when the end result turns it off. So you go outside, it's really hot, your brain says, time to sweat, your body says, here comes the sweat, you start sweating, you cool your body down, and it's not like you keep sweating after you've cooled down, right? Because then it would bring it you get way too cold if you just kept sweating and sweating and sweating, even if your body temperature was normal, right? You only sweat when it's hot, and then you stop sweating when you cool down, right? And that's because, again, this is negative feedback, so it's going to turn it off. Okay, so again, we have a stimulus, going to send it to a receptor, send that information to the control center, which tells the effector, have a response. And again, this is an example of negative feedback if it turns it off. For positive feedback, it keeps going. And positive feedback is therefore rare in biology. Few example, or the main example people talk about, is childbirth. So for women, your contractions, they start off and they get worse and worse and worse. They don't turn off after a single contraction. So most of the body follows negative feedback, except for a few instances, like childbirth, that follow positive feedback. So in this video, we talked about homeostasis and how we use negative feedback to help regulate the body and keep it at those appropriate set points at homeostasis. In the next video, we'll talk about the language of anatomy briefly.